the Islamic reform future is still obscure, and study on trend for Islamic reform are still scarce and limited. So basically, the Islamic reform will therefore be mapped to display the pattern and trend in publication from 2011 up to 2020. So this article approach is based on thematic evaluation and interpretation by Atlas TI9. And the finding of the code-to-code document study have shown the Islamic reform pattern and development between 2011 up to 2020. So basically, this finding contributed to 4 themes, which is first, Muslim school of thought; second, reform movement; Muslim reformists; and last but not least, reform institution. Therefore, the finding helped to highlight the issue and challenges in Islamic reform and define the potential gap for future solution, especially in the area of Islamic thought. So basically, the term thematic review is taken from Dr. Zaid Zairul 2020 and implemented because this method of study applies the thematic analysis procedure in the literature review. As mentioned by Clark and Brown, defined thematic analysis is a process of identifying the patterns and construct theme over through reading on the subject. So there are steps of doing this, and the following step is to identify the pattern and construct category to understand the trend of Islamic reform in Muslim world. So there are also the selection, the category, the selection of the literature was performed according to the several selection criteria. The first one, the publication from 2011 up to 2020, they have at least keyword Islamic reform or Islamic revivalism, and focusing on Islamic reform in Muslim world. So the decision to limit the country origin was made to help the define issue and problem facing in this research. And there are also limitations on this study because they only use 2 databases, which is Corpus and Mendeley. So moving forward, okay. So basically, I will go quite fast. So basically, however, the final paper to be reviewed down to 63 up to 280. There are about 216 articles were removed due to the preliminary result and anecdote. Were not discussing about Islamic reform. Some of the articles were also found incomplete and have broken link and overlap the metadata. Therefore, I rejected the what we call the article. So the article that I accept is based on author, issue number, periodical, publisher, volume, and year of publication. So this is the method that I use. Basically, I taken from the Scopus and also the Mendeley, only 2 databases. So basically, when I filter it and using what we call and where the duplication and remove the duplication, and also use the search string like this, for example, Islamic and revivalism, and therefore the final one I got 63 result, and this result is extract to the Atlas TI to analyze. So all the 63 metadata will include in the Atlas TI to create as the primary sources. So when we use Atlas TI, it's much more easier and systematic, so that it will code from the document to document. So basically, when the first one we get several themes, and after that, after several categorized, and we can get the theme that we want, and it also contribute and answer the question, the research question on what are the current trend in Islamic reform discussed in publication from 2011 up to 2020. So the finding, the most important and the most interesting part is that when we analyze using Atlas TI, we can get 2 findings, even though our research is more on qualitative data, but also we can get quantitative data or quantitative finding as well. For example, in this, for example, in Islamic reform, this is the numbers of articles talk about issue in Islamic reform. This is a quantitative finding that I can get from throughout the review itself. So based on this, we can see the number of articles are fluctuated starting from 2011 up to 2020. Only for about 2016, the number are quite high. It's about 16 or 17. But for 2020, the number of publication paper slightly reduced, or maybe in the still the article are still in progress. Okay, this also a publication found according to journal and year. So basically, it's about there is many tables. So this is just example. This is how you can see the journal or the article talk about Islamic reform. So it will be appear according to year, and also you can see whether the publication is there or not. So this is a very interesting part. And another one, when you use the ISTAC, you can also get the word cloud, and you can generate the word cloud from the 16 article. For example, when you use the search string to get this Islamic reform, you can get the most frequent word used in the text. For example, for this one, the most frequent one is the Islamic. Islamic is repeated about 662 times, and also the word reform. Reform also repeated about 214 times. So basically, when we analyze and we see whether it is it is okay, and it is reliable to our study. So meaning to say that the word cloud is based on the what we search for it. Okay, so this is the qualitative finding that we want to discuss. So these are the trends and patterns that I highlighted and I get from throughout the literature review and thematic review. The first one is Muslim Reformists, second one Islamic Reform movement, third one Reform institution, and Muslim school of thought. This network is basically I can extract from thematic ISTAC. So when we discuss about the first one about Islamic thought or when we discuss about Islamic reform revivalism, among the subject matter that include in Muslim is Muslim school of thought. The essence of reform is to make a change and uphold the moral principle for the betterment of society. So the emergence of different segments of Muslim school of thought can be seen through the identification of themselves, particularly or labeling themselves such as traditionalists, Salafism, modernism, and etc. So the traditionalists and modernists are the main issue highlighted throughout the year from 2011 up to 2020. So, for example, according to Jilsa 2015, the theological root reshaping the Salafi idea, practices and identities when facing with modernity, later supported by Griffel 2015, mentioned that the word Salafism was given by Westerners and stated that the contemporary Muslim movement, rightly called by their own name, rather use the term Salafism as represented their identity. So the main issue of this thought were the clash of the idea in accepting modernity. However, there is still lacking paper talk about how to manage the perception between this school of thought of Islamic reform. Therefore, it is necessary to increase the literature on how to manage the perception between different school of thought in Islamic reform. Second one, we go to the reform movement. Basically, if you can see from this graph, this is the literature review that I can get from Scopus and also Mendeley after I've extracted into ISTAC. So another subject matter when we discuss about Islamic reform is the Muslim reform movement itself. Muslim reform movement have grown in many countries as a subsequent of the crisis of modernization in the 20th century. They have been working to reform the various Muslim communities in society. So basically, Islamic reform movement have developed and spread from the Middle East to many Muslim countries in the world, including Indonesia and Malaysia, where Muslims represent the largest population. So to welcome the start of the movement, it deals with the issue of that buffer modern Muslims such as democracy, freedom, pluralism, and also secularism. There are some progress and regress on how Muslims respond to those issues. So along the literature searching from the year 2018 to 2020, Muslim reform movement discussed much more frequently in many sub-Saharan African countries rather than ASEAN countries. So basically, according to Shabar 2019, most studies that have dealt with reform movement have examined them from the purely historical perspective, simply chronicling relating event and figures. Later, it's supported by Kapoor. He mentioned that its emphasis on the scriptural purity towards any localized way to practicing Islam interact with its cultural and historical context. So, however, there is a lack on observing the overall pattern or principle which illustrate the deducing lesson that can be applied to later situation and method addressing on the issue highlighted. So therefore, there's a greater need to address more on future study on how Sharia is formulated in Muslim reform movement, so it will reinvigorate Muslim society and resolve many social, political and cultural issues. Okay, moving forward to Muslim reformists, I think this Muslim reformist is the main subject matter in Islamic reform. So Muslim reformists being recognized as a reformist with a real attitude and moral principle. It can also be seen with its thought and understanding to empower young and youth generation to build a better nation in future in line with Quran and Sunnah. So in order to understand the work of Muslim reformists, we have to see the end result, whether the reform agenda is achievable throughout his life or vice versa. For example, Buya Hamka, Pak Nasir, Syed Sheikh Al-Hadi are among the reformers in Nusantara with multi-dimension skill and intelligence. So for instance, the spirit of reform in Haji Abdul Malik bin Abdul Karim Amrullah, known as Buya Hamka, was transformed in his writing. He's not only a prolific writer, but also a poet who concerned with the custom and cultural issue and challenges. He also an author and more than hundreds books and articles that touch on Islamic philosophy, theology, history, and so on and so forth. So Hamka diverse writing are still read and referred to many scholars, students and the laymen alike. And his 30-volume exegesis of Quran, the Tafsir Al-Azhar, is regarded the most influential among Muslims in South Asia. So prior to this thematic review paper starting from 2011 up to 2020, so researchers highlighted more on reformist thought and their contribution. For example, according to Rizki, Socratic thought is much more different from other Arab reformists, and he more emphasized on the egalitarianism and the development of IIIT school for the benefit of people. How we also mentioned that Jamaluddin Al-Afghani thought is based on the basic foundation of revelation, and therefore revivalists must return to the foundation of Quran and Sunnah. By having said that, there are issues and challenges also faced by reformists. For example, the emergence of new style of reforming thought by reformists. Bin Abdullah al 2016 stated that revival thought by Safrahan in Muslim reformist political thought is confusing, especially in a Han view enabling other than Arabic language in performing prayer. This is due to the emergence of a new pace of thinking and post-normal era in which secularism, pluralism be normalized. Therefore, more research is needed to be done to contribute more to society. And also we have furthermore so that it needed to be done on Muslim reformists with a true meaning of Islah and Tajdeed by referring back to the Quran and Sunnah. Moreover, reformists who are still alive with great achievement and major contribution in society should be highlighted in order to see the reform process being applied in the state and in more academic literature in the future. So moving forward, the last one, I think last but not least, the reform institution. The fourth theme in Islamic reform is the reform institution. So most of the institutions were founded by the reformists as individuals, scholars and worldwide influence. These institutions have tremendously potential to accelerate the trend in a positive direction. So the idea of reform institution mostly on education institution. For example, according to Rizki, Ahmad Sharukati, reform was to adapt Al-Irshad school with colonial education system in order to attract indigenous students. Their aim was to provide the best education system to the society, and later supported by Hardianto, saying that the pesantren, madrasah, integrated Islamic school was developed together with the emergence of the Islamic Reform movement in Indonesia. In the case of Malaysia, the call for implementation of Islam from various quarters provide the tremendous challenge to the government to its resistance, but rather to find the best means to answering this call. Malaysia is a multiracial and multi-religious country. Although the Malaysian Federation Constitution provide that Islam is the religious of the federation, what must be in place is the wisdom, hikmah, wisdom of thought and wisdom of action. So the answer lies in education. So Malaysia education system has undergone the tremendous metamorphosis, and Islam is a very high place in education system. However, the presence of colonial master altered this position. Before Malaysia attained independence from the British, the teaching of Islam was classical in nature. As Malaysia embraced modernity in all sectors of life, questions arise regarding how Islam, particularly Islamic education, can stand tall in the face of modernity. So while the world is preoccupied with modernity and secularism, in Malaysia, Islam must be the core of the education system. So this goal was and is challenging. However, this challenge has been embraced in a skillful and methodical manner. So this goal has been achieved, although many more improvement can be expected. The fabric of the nation remains strong. In the context of Malaysia, this may be one of the greatest signs of social progress for Muslims. I think to sum up, as a conclusion, this paper tremendously discussed, not only studied by the Muslim researcher also, by the Muslim researcher, but also the Western researcher in Islamic Reform field of study. So it brings into conclusion that Western researcher is also concerned on Muslim thought and civilization by real term, and not necessarily associate Muslim identity with Arabism. It means that some people, regardless their religiosity, have the intention to study the field of Islamic thought. And as the discussion concerned, Islamic Reform, the researcher believe that the importance to the field of Islamic Reform can be viewed in the wider range and of Islamic scope, and not too narrow on the exclusive school of thought. In addition to the limitation of this study, which is focusing on thematic review Islamic Reform, the researchers suggest for some recommendation for the future. Firstly, there is a need to do more research on the contemporary Muslim thought rather than focusing on different segmentation of Muslim school of thought. A more contemporary, human and inclusive interpretation of the Quran that is widely accepted by the majority Muslim people will move Islam away from ossified tradition into the vision of justice, equality and the beauty that is rooted in Quran and Hadith. So furthermore, the work of Reformist academic will influence the upcoming generation who will be more willing and motivated to rethink problematic aspect of Muslim society and develop viable solution. Therefore, for next study, researcher can explore more on the theme of alive reformist and his real contribution in society at large and shaping the Muslim identity in the state. If the trend reach take off the point, they will have transformative effect and the future will not be repeat the recent past. I think that's all from me. Thank you.